Shalom from Israel to all of the Daystar viewers around the world. I'm Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer and founder of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 25:5, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." And God says in Zechariah 8:16, "These are the things that you shall do. Speak out the truth to one another. Judge with truth and judgment to peace in your gates. And always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, the fruit of the peace talks is murder and terrorism. Addressing a delegation of Christian parliamentarians in Jerusalem last week, Israel Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon spoke frankly about the senseless murder of 2 young Israeli soldiers during the Jewish high holidays and the dangers of negotiations with the Palestinians. He told the Christian leaders that more than 1,500 Israelis were murdered by terrorists after Israel signed a peace agreement with the Palestinians. He said these murders are the fruit of the Oslo peace accords.
The state of Israel is reeling from the brutal murders of the 2 young soldiers. 20-year-old Tomer Chazan, a sergeant in the Israeli Air Force, was abducted and killed by a Muslim co-worker, Nidal Amar. The 42-year-old West Bank Palestinian planned to use Chazan's body as a bargaining chip for the release of his brother, a member of the Fatah Tanzim terrorist group, who is serving time in an Israeli prison for his role in terror attacks. Another young soldier was assassinated as he guarded Jewish worshippers praying at the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron during the holiday of Sukkot. 20-year-old Staff Sergeant Gavriel Kobi was shot in the neck by a Palestinian sniper. In the wake of the murders, members of the Israeli Knesset spoke out about the violence, the peace talks, and the possibility of another prisoner release. Yochanan has more on that story.
That's right, Aaron. In response to the news of 2 IDF soldiers murdered in cold blood by Palestinian terrorists, Economy and Trade Minister Naftali Bennett said, under the auspices of the peace talks, the Sukkot festival has turned into a holiday of harming IDF soldiers. He said there's no doubt that there have been unfortunate developments since the talks began. This requires the Israeli government to rethink its path. The answer to terror must be a war on the murderers and not dialogue with those who encourage them. Israel's former foreign minister Avigdor Lieberman said the murders are proof that the Palestinian Authority has no desire or intention of making peace with Israel. He said the killer of Sergeant Chazan is from a family known to be affiliated with Fatah. It is important to note that since the negotiations began, kidnapping attempts have increased exponentially. In the past 6 months, there were 27 attempted abductions of Israeli soldiers by Palestinian terrorists.
In the aftermath of the soldiers' murders, a Hamas leader has called for more terror attacks. Musa Abu Marzouk said that the Palestinians are at the beginning of a popular intifada against Israel, and that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's plan will not save the day. Flyers were dropped over Palestinian villages calling for a day of rage against Israel.
Christian leaders from more than 20 countries gathered in the holy city of Jerusalem last week to discuss ways to fight the anti-Israel campaign started by the European Union. The event, hosted by the Israel Allies Foundation, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, and the World Jewish Congress, facilitated the adoption of a draft resolution signed by lawmakers from all over the world. In addition to labeling the EU boycott of Israel a biased act of discrimination, the signatories also called for Jerusalem to remain the undivided capital of the Jewish state of Israel. President of the World Jewish Congress, Ron Lauder, said, "This conference is ample proof that Israel has strong Christian allies in parliaments and governments around the world on which it can rely."
Representatives of the European Union have created an international incident by intentionally violating Israeli law and abusing Israeli soldiers. After an Israeli court upheld the demolition of illegal Palestinian homes last week, the EU sent aid workers to deliver emergency supplies toward the rebuilding of the dismantled structures. Palestinians at the site threw stones at IDF officers who were ordered to confiscate the equipment to uphold the verdict of the court. The EU workers then became violent, and one punched an IDF soldier in the face. Angry over the incident, the Israeli Foreign Ministry released a statement calling the diplomats provocateurs who violated the law by disregarding the ruling of the Israeli court and using the pretext of delivering humanitarian aid in order to provoke the IDF. The statement went on to say that the idea of a foreign diplomat can strike an Israeli border police officer in the face is totally unacceptable, and that explanations from the EU members and their governments would be warranted.
The Obama administration continues to try and arrange a meeting with the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. Last week, the White House deputy spokesman said the U.S. is ready to engage in talks on the basis of mutual respect. Both Obama and Rouhani will be in New York City to attend the United Nations General Assembly, and the Obama administration has been reaching out for weeks to arrange a meeting between the two leaders. The chairman of the House Subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa, Congresswoman Liana Ross-Lehtinen, spoke out against the possible meeting, calling it a fool's errand. She said that Rouhani will not change the Iranian regime's stance on Israel. He is a staunch supporter of Ayatollah Khamenei and vehemently opposes the Jewish state's right to exist. The Florida Republican Congresswoman added that in many ways Rouhani is much more dangerous than Ahmadinejad. Rouhani has managed to fool a lot of people with his manipulating words and his dog and pony show, and some have been so hopeful that he will be different that they have swallowed his act hook, line, and sinker.
In response to the news of a possible meeting between Iranian and American leaders, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards released a statement cautioning against relations with the West. It said that historical experiences make it necessary for the diplomatic apparatus of our country to carefully and skeptically monitor the behavior of White House officials so that the righteous demands of our nation are recognized and respected by those who favor interaction.
At least 70 people were killed and 200 injured in Nairobi when Muslim gunmen opened fire in a crowded shopping mall. The Somali al-Shabaab terrorist group with links to al-Qaeda was quick to claim responsibility for the heinous attack. According to witnesses, masked gunmen entered the mall and told Muslims to leave before they opened fire on non-Muslim innocent civilians. Hours after the news of the siege reached Israel, the Jewish state sent its ambassador to offer Israel's assistance. Israeli security officers were at the scene to provide assistance to the Kenyan authorities and aid to the wounded. A Kenyan security official said the Israelis have just entered and they are rescuing hostages and the injured.
More than 80 Christians have been massacred by Islamic extremists who detonated 2 explosions at a historic church in Pakistan. The blasts were timed to kill the Christian worshipers as they left services last Sunday. The bombs were wired into a suicide vest, which was also packed with ball bearings to inflict maximum injuries to the Christian victims.
The City of London hosted a forum on the media's failure to report the truth about the systematic murder of Christians in the Middle East. Tom Holland, a keynote speaker and Middle East historian, told the panel that the world is watching the effective extinction of Christianity from its birthplace. With the exception of Israel, Holland spoke about the Middle East, saying in terms of the sheer scale of the hatreds and sectarian rivalries, we are witnessing something on the scale of horror of Europe's 30 Years' War. Nina Shea, director of the Washington-based Hudson Institute Center for Religious Freedom, said the destruction of churches, Christian businesses, and holy sites in Egypt are intentional and well planned. She said the Coptic Christians of Egypt, the oldest and largest remaining Christian minority in the Middle East, are experiencing the worst persecution in 700 years. She said a 4th century church, which was a UNESCO World Heritage Site, had been destroyed and then designated as a Muslim prayer space. Shea said that she gathered enough evidence to prove that the violence was part of a plan to drive out the Coptic Christians by terrorizing them into leaving Egypt.
more than 1 million Jewish children have been killed by abortion in Israel since 1948. Israel is currently engaged in a demographic war for its very survival as a Jewish state. Imagine what a difference 1 million more Jews would have made for Israel. Friends of Efrat saves the lives of thousands of children every year by providing support to pregnant women in distress. Since 1977, Efrat has saved over 30,000 lives and is recognized as a world leader in preventing abortions. You can play a major role in Israel's survival now by helping us save Israel's unborn children.
And that concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in yet another beautiful day on our rooftop studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Sheldon Schulman, Israeli security consultant, known all around the world. Sheldon, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Sheldon, you know, there's a lot of talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is it really all about?
Well, it's a conflict that's come out of the refusal of the entire Arab world to accept that any minority will have rights in the Middle East. So for 65 years, since the day Israel was created, the entire Arab world and the Palestinians have been fighting not to gain something for themselves, but to deny something to the Jews. And one by one, many of the other Arab countries, for their own reasons, have come to accept not the right of the Jewish people to a state, but the fact that we have one. The Palestinians continue to refuse that. And had this been about just the Palestinians getting a state, they could have had one 65 years ago when Israel was created. Here on the street outside of where we're sitting today, on the day Israel was declared, hundreds of thousands of Jews dancing in the streets that the Palestinians get a state, we get a state. Israel's not the reason the Palestinians don't have a state. We were actually the first ones to accept them having a state. And for 65 years, we've been begging them to have a state. But there's a catch. They get a state, but we get to keep ours. And the reason there hasn't been peace, despite all of Israel's efforts, and Israel's last offer was more than 100% of the West Bank, dividing Jerusalem, here where we're looking, running a Berlin Wall down the middle of it, giving up the places that are critical to our security, and let me put this personally, to the security of my children day in and day out, places that are the heart and soul of the Jewish people, including the Western Wall, which is a 5-minute walk from here. And it'll be the second time we've agreed to give up the Western Wall. So if you offer somebody more than 100% of their asking price and they still say no, the price isn't the issue. They don't want to do the deal.
Sheldon, you know, it's interesting. People always talk about land for peace. They talk about the political situation. Isn't this really just a religious war?
This is absolutely a religious war, and it's part of something that I hope we'll talk about in a little bit, which is the way this region treats all of its minorities, not just the Jews. This is the denial of rights to people on the basis of religion, and it's just not fair. And the idea that you can compromise with somebody who wants to deny you your rights because of your faith is just ludicrous. We will be able to make peace with the Palestinians when they accept that we get something, as some of the other Arab countries have, who've been able to put aside their religious hatred of the Jews, and the Christians for that matter, and other minorities in the Middle East. That's the issue. It's never been about land, and land isn't the way to solve it.
You know, that's an interesting point you bring up. A lot of people think that it's Jews that are persecuted in the Middle East, but really the most persecuted minority are Christians. Christians have been hunted, killed, exiled, attacked on a daily basis all over the Middle East. Why is there no talk about this?
Well, for us in Israel, we look at our Christian brothers and sisters as being in exactly the same boat as we are. The fundamental rights of Christians to pursue their faith is based on the same hatred and racism and denial of rights to minorities as this long war against the Jews. It's exactly the same cause and it's the same result. And the hundreds of churches that have been burned across the Middle East and even in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, as Islam is moving south from from the Mediterranean, from the North African countries into Africa, the murder of priests and nuns, the fact that the Christians of Iraq were afraid to celebrate Christmas this year because somebody would come and attack their families and burn down their houses. The massive systematic denial of fundamental religious freedom to Christians across the Middle East is beneath contempt, and it is time that the world recognize that this intolerance, this failure to recognize the fundamental right of Christians and Jews and Baha'is and Druze and Kurds to pursue their faith openly and freely is one of the most enormous problems the world is facing. That's what the conflict in the Middle East is about, and it's just incomprehensible that the world stands by in silence while Christians are persecuted across the Middle East.
Sheldon, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, I think it's a simple one, Josh. It's time for those of us who believe in religious freedom, who believe in the values that are expressed in the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights, to stop pretending that this isn't happening. It's time for us to stand up for ourselves. The persecution, the rage, the immorality of this region is only going to continue to grow until it is stopped. And we have to stand up and say, these are the things we believe in, and we will not let you persecute us again. We will not sit at the back of the bus. We will not let you deny our rights. The time has come for all of us, Christians and Jews, we're all in the same boat in this part of the world, to stand up, speak proudly of our rights, and act to defend them in the face of the oppression that's trying to deny them.
Thank you, Sheldon, for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
This is Jerusalem, Israel's capital city. It's an ancient and modern treasure that is beyond belief. There's a little bit of Israel in all of us. Come find the Israel in you.
Up next, shining light from Israel.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
When Hitler rose to power, no one believed that he would actually do the things that he said.
You know, our history teaches us something very simple. When an enemy says he's going to annihilate you, believe him.
Iran today poses a danger that threatens to engulf the entire world in chaos.
A nuclear-armed Iran is a grave danger to the peace and security of the entire world.
Diplomacy has failed.
Will sanctions work?
If diplomacy doesn't work, the clock could run out. We've wasted years on failed diplomacy. There's no chance that Iran will be talked out of its nuclear weapons program.
Iran is believed to be expanding right now its uranium enrichment activity deep inside of a mountain bunker.
Iran has tripled the pace of production of 20% grade uranium. They're transferring their facilities underground to be immune.
Time is running out.
They're racing towards acquiring a nuclear weapon.
None of us can afford to wait much longer.
صواريخنا ولا قيود لنا على عدد الصواريخ.
ایران ملت‌های منطقه با مشت محکم دهن شما خواهند زد.
وأن تكون قنبلة ذرية إيران وباكستان قنابل ضد إسرائيل، ونهتف كما هتفنا في طهران مار جبار إسرائيل، مار جبار أمريكا.
For the sake of our prosperity, for the sake of our security, for the sake of our children, Iran must
Stop.
Be
Iran.
Stop.
Now. Last time, the world was silent. This time, our voices will be heard.
Anywhere else, this would be a vacation by a lake. But this is the Sea of Galilee. The wonders of Israel are beyond belief. There's a little bit of Israel in all of us. Come find the Israel in you.
Please stay tuned for the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Welcome to the ICJ report. My name is Juha Ketala and I'm the International Director of our ministry. The Lord has called us both to Israel and to the nations. That's why we have our headquarters here in Jerusalem. You can see our building here behind me. And in the nations, we have our national branches. Now we as a ministry, we are like a funnel, like a pipe with a wide opening to channel the support and help from the nations into the lives of the individual citizens in Israel. We have had our physical presence here in Jerusalem since 1980. In our headquarters here in Jerusalem, we have a staff of about 40 people from more than 12 different nations. And from here, we are spreading out to all Israel. And the Lord has enabled us to touch the different layers of the Israeli society. We have been doing it and we are doing it either by our ICEJ aid social assistance programs and projects that are going to the north and south and east and west of Israel, or we are doing the touching of the layers of the Israeli society by our partnerships with many different various institutes here in Israel. Among them, for example, the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, enabling us to touch the national leadership of Israeli nation, the modern day Israel. Or we have a partnership with the Yad Vashem, the most prestigious, very well-known institute in Israel, the Holocaust Museum and the Educational Center. Now, this is what we are doing in Israel. Now, in the nations then, and this is vitally important, very, very important. In the nations, we are serving the body of Christ. Our message nourishes. It builds trust in the spirit of the believers. When we show from the Bible and from the history how God has been so faithful to the Israelites and the modern day Israelis. The Israelis are back in the modern day state of Israel here in the land. God is forever faithful. So we are serving the local body of Christ with our message. But we are doing more than that. We are raising a global prayer on behalf of Israel in the nations. And we are also raising some other kind of support in the nations And we do this by reaching out to the national leaders and the decision makers in the countries. We are speaking on behalf of Israel and raising understanding of the Israelis and what kind of situations they have in the land. You need to be part of this. Within the last year alone, we were in more than 30 nations, almost 30 nations, from Israel, from Jerusalem. And this is in addition to what the national branches have been doing in more than 70 nations. We have been establishing new branches within the last year. In November last year, we had a new branch we established in Sierra Leone, then in February in Senegal, and in Niger, and then in May in Slovenia. So we have new branches. We have a vision to reach out to the Muslim countries. The Lord prophesied over us that we will establish 10 new branches in the Muslim countries. China is opening for us. Spanish-speaking world is opening for us. In Africa alone, we have more than 20 nations to go into. You need to get involved. Do something practical. Click the donation button on our website and learn where you can put your monies in to support the ministry. Actions prevail over mere knowledge. Write a check. Pray for us. Remember, we are your embassy here in Jerusalem.
Those who dreamed about the Jewish state, those who wrought the historical miracle, and against all odds established a state. Those who arrived in the homeland to their new home, those who propelled Israel forward step after step.
I have no doubt that this expanded partnership with our many Christian supporters will greatly strengthen Israel in the years ahead. And I want to thank you all for being part of that historic effort and that historic partnership. May God bless all of Israel's friends throughout the world. May God bless you.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all your Israel updates.